The night was cold and silent, just as Tati remembered it. The haunting image of her father, Hugh, lying lifeless in the pool of his own blood on the living room floor, played over and over in her mind like a broken record. She had been just 12 when she watched from the shadows, paralyzed with fear, as the men who broke into their home shot him point blank. They had dragged her mother, Joyce, and her twin brothers, Bongani and Bonga, into a separate room, holding them hostage while they dealt with her father. Tati had escaped that night, slipping unnoticed into the hallway and witnessing the moment her father's life ended. That moment had defined her, had pushed her down the path of revenge. She had vowed to avenge her father's death, and when her mother asked her, years later, to promise to bring justice to their family, Tati had agreed, her heart hardened by grief. As she grew older, she learned that the man responsible was Sello Dlamini, her father's political rival. He had risen to power in South Africa, a man whose charm and intelligence had won over the country. But Tati knew better. She believed that behind his polished exterior was the man who had taken her father from her. Tati was patient, methodical. She studied the man for years, waiting for the perfect time to infiltrate Sello's world, to seduce him, to make him fall deeply in love with her. She thought she could bring him down from within. Her plan was rock solid, until she got to know him, until she fell in love with him. When Sello looked at Tati, he saw that he had fallen deeply in love with, showering her with the kind of affection that made her heart ache with guilt. He had proven his love through thoughtful gestures, a handwritten note on her bedside table every morning, love poems he scribbled late at night, dinners he personally prepared to surprise her, even though his cooking skills were not so good. But his efforts touched Tati's heart. She remembered the time he had taken her to Johannesburg, not for a political event, but simply because she had mentioned wanting to see a particular ballet. He had gone out of his way to reserve the entire private box for them, holding her hand the entire time as they watched, his eyes never leaving her face. But this wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to fall for him. One day, while Tati was in the house alone, she got a call from her burner phone. It could only be one person calling, her mother. "Hello, Mother," Tati said. Without greeting back, Joyce immediately started questioning Tati about her progress. She was also annoyed that her daughter hadn't been updating her. And then, "What's going on with you? Where is the progress report? Or have you forgotten about the mission?" Tati's mother went on to scold her. After the call, Tati put her head back into the game. After some months of not finding anything solid, she relaxed and let her feelings get in the way. "It's game time," she said. When she became Sello's wife, she didn't want to change anything about Sello, including the house he lived in. Sello made room for her, and she even redecorated the house. But there was one thing he was adamant about, and that was that the room next to his study was off-limits to everyone. "That's where I'll start," she said. Tati's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle of the room Sello had told her never to enter. The memories of his late wife and son were locked behind that door, and he had made it clear it was sacred to him, but Tati couldn't wait any longer. Her mission had become clouded with doubt. She needed answers, both about her father and about the man she now called her husband. With a deep breath, she opened the door. The room was dimly lit, filled with the quiet echoes of memories. Photos lined the walls, pictures of Sello's late wife and son, frozen in moments of happiness that he had never shared with her. It hit her harder than she expected. He had lost so much. Her gaze fell on a folder lying on the desk. She picked it up, her hands shaking as she read through its contents. What she saw unraveled everything she had believed. Her father, Hugh, wasn't the victim she had thought him to be. He had been involved in corrupt dealings, violent ones even. Sello's wife and child had been killed because of her father. Joyce, her mother, had known all along and had kept the truth hidden from her. "How could they lie to me?" Tati thought, her heart pounding in her chest. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, and anger bubbled up inside her. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. Blade, Sello's right-hand man, appeared in the doorway, his expression cold and calculating. I knew it, he said, his voice low. I knew you were up to something. Thati turned sharply, clutching the file to her chest. Blade stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. You've been playing him all along, haven't you? Reporting back to your family? I've been watching you. I've warned him, but he's blinded by his love for you. Before she could defend herself, Cello entered the room. His face was a mixture of confusion and devastation as he took in the scene. The folder in her hands, Blade's accusing stare. His eyes locked onto hers, searching for answers. Thati, is this true? He asked quietly. Have you been lying to me? Tears welled up in Thati's eyes as she nodded, the weight of her betrayal crashing down on her. Yes, she whispered, but I didn't know the full story. I thought you were the one who killed my father. Cello's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. I didn't kill your father, he said, his voice strained. Your father killed my wife and son. The air grew thick with tension. Cello stepped closer, his voice breaking as he spoke. I loved you, Thati. I still do. But how could you lie to me like this? Thati's heart shattered as she saw the pain in Cello's eyes. She wanted to fall into his arms, to explain everything, but the truth had already cut too deep. Blade stood to the side, his arms crossed, his eyes full of vindication. I told you, Cello, Blade said coldly. I told you she couldn't be trusted. But Cello wasn't listening to Blade. His eyes were fixed on Thati, searching her face for a hint of the woman he had fallen in love with. His hands, which had once caressed her cheeks with tenderness, now hung heavy at his sides. I love you, Thati whispered, stepping toward him. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I was doing what was right for my family, but now I don't even know who I am anymore. I never wanted to hurt you. Cello's hands trembled as he cupped her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. You've already hurt me, he said softly, his voice breaking, but I don't know if I can live without you. For a moment, there was silence, a tension so thick it seemed to fill the room. The love they shared, the betrayal, the impossible choices they both faced, everything hung in the balance. Just as Cello lowered his hands, his resolve wavering, Blade stepped forward. This is your chance, Cello, Blade said, his voice cutting through the emotional haze. She's a traitor. She's been working against you. If you don't stop her now, she'll destroy everything. Cello looked at Blade, then back at Thati, torn between loyalty and love. His heart ached. He wanted to trust her, to forgive her, but Blade's words weighed heavily on his mind. Take her away, Cello finally said, his voice barely audible. I can't do this right now. As the guards moved toward Thati, something slipped from her pocket and fell to the floor. A small ultrasound scan photo of her unborn child. Cello froze, his eyes wide with shock. Thati, are you pregnant? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Thati nodded, her tears falling freely now. Yes, she whispered. I was going to tell you. I wasn't lying about that. Cello's face softened for a moment, the weight of the revelation settling in. He stared at the scan photo, his heart pounding. The child she carried was his, a symbol of their love, despite everything. Cello hesitated for what felt like an eternity, the ultrasound scan lying between them like a fragile lifeline. He knew he could send her away, punish her for her betrayal. But the sight of that small photo, their child, changed everything. His love for her, for the family they could have, was stronger than his anger. Leave us, Cello ordered the guards, his voice firm but quiet. Blade started to protest, but Cello shot him a warning look. Blade, not another word. This is my decision. Blade clenched his jaw, frustrated but powerless to stop him. You're making a mistake, Cello, he warned, before storming out of the room. Once they were alone, Cello stepped closer to Thati, his hands gently cupping her face again. Thati, he said softly, I'm not going to lose you. Not now. Not ever. Tears filled Tati's eyes as she looked into his, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and guilt. I'm so sorry, Cello, she whispered. I'll never hide anything from you again. I promise. Cello's lips trembled as he pulled her into a tight embrace, his arms wrapping around her as though he would never let her go. We'll get through this, he whispered, his voice full of both hope and pain. But we have to be honest with each other from now on. No more secrets. Tati nodded, her face buried in his chest, overwhelmed by both his forgiveness and his love. For the first time in years, she felt free. Free to love him, to start over, and to build a future together. As they stood together in the dimly lit room, the weight of the past seemed to lift. The pain, the betrayals, the lies, they would have to work through them. But in that moment, they both knew that love was stronger than anything that had come before. As Cello presses his forehead against hers, their hands intertwined over her growing belly. It wasn't going to be easy, but they had a future now, and they would fight for it, together.